And the winter of 1908, in the central Siberian taiga near the Podkamenia Tunguska River, Alexei Voronov, a 39-year-old surveyor employed by the Imperial Geographical Society, became the subject of a classified inquiry whose details were never formally released. Records indicate that Voronov had been assigned to chart uninhabited forest terrain east of Yeniseisk, following a directive to update resource maps related to timber extraction. On the morning of June 30th, he and two assistants reported a singular luminescent object descending from the northern horizon. Their statements were filed with local authorities but disappeared from provincial archives by 1910. According to surviving correspondence between the Irkutsk Governorate and the Imperial Academy of Sciences, a shockwave was registered across more than 800 kilometers. Barometric readings fell abruptly, windows shattered in distant settlements. The local telegraph office in Nizhny Angarsk transmitted a short encoded notice: impact confirmed, coordinates uncertain, immediate assessment impossible. The dispatch bears a note added later in pencil, believed to be in Voronov's handwriting: light exceeded solar intensity. Subsequent accounts by Evenki witnesses mentioned flattened forest extending in a radial pattern, yet official memoranda emphasized combustion without crater formation. A preliminary team sent from St. Petersburg in late July failed to reach the zone due to flooding and logistical failure. What remains in the archives of the Academy's Committee on Meteoric Phenomena is a single-page summary dated September 1908, unsigned: no meteoritic fragments located. Area exhibits abnormal magnetization. Vegetation destroyed in concentric perimeter. After 1910, Voronov's name reappears only in a private letter addressed to Professor Karl Fedorovich Tsiolkov, held in the Astrakhan Regional Archive. The letter references an afterglow persisting beneath the ground surface and describes instruments reacting to an unseen current. Tsiolkov's subsequent diary entries mention a radiant resonance north of the Angara Basin. Both documents were marked confidential in 1921 when reclassified under the Commissariat of Internal Affairs. The surviving translator's annotations appended to these materials, dated much later, note that terminology suggests early awareness of ionizing radiation, though no such vocabulary existed at the time. The translator's marginalia also record discrepancies between the official coordinates and those redacted in subsequent Soviet-era maps. The implication is that later surveys deliberately displaced the recorded epicenter by nearly 12 kilometers. By 1912, a new commission under Professor Leonid Kulik was proposed but delayed indefinitely due to the First World War. Internal memoranda from the Ministry of Industry referenced competing claims regarding ownership of mineral rights in the affected territory. A handwritten memorandum, unsigned, reads: if foreign agents are already aware, the ground must remain untouched. This line was underlined twice in red pencil, and the note's lower half was torn off. Records from 1916 show Voronov reassigned to a munitions supply office near Tomsk. His personnel file contains a later insert by an unidentified clerk: medical condition deteriorating. Skin lesions and fatigue. There is no further reference to his death or burial. When cross-referenced with hospital logs from Tomsk Provincial Infirmary, the surname appears once, attached to an entry listing: radiodermatitis, undefined origin. The implication of this correlation remains unacknowledged in official Soviet records. A margin annotation by R.D. in 1954 states, data precede by decades the instrumentation required to generate them. He further observes that frequency values correspond not to seismic oscillation but to engineered modulation. Throughout the 1920s, various reports emerged of vegetation regrowth in the blast zone proceeding at irregular rates. Forestry Department summaries describe tree formations following spiral alignment. A Soviet-era soil analysis conducted near Vanavara noted continued absence of insect life despite normal chlorophyll content. The final page of that report includes a partially erased note: signal continues beneath threshold of perception. Cross-referenced meteorological records show an unexplained thermal inversion recurring each year in June. The anomaly, described as a warmth rising from below without surface cause, persisted at least until 1931, when the observatory at Yeniseisk ceased monitoring due to resource diversion. A memorandum marked "Restricted" for commissariat review mentions an instrument designated Type 013 resonator, apparently constructed to detect subatomic oscillations. Its test results were inconclusive, though accompanying tables indicate steady readings even when the device was shielded. The table headings, translated from early Cyrillic script, include the word radii, though the isotope itself was not yet in known industrial use. During the 1930s, foreign intelligence began referencing similar experiments. Declassified British intercepts contain allusions to Siberian field resonance and unverified impact energies exceeding meteor standard. These documents, obtained from the Foreign Office archives decades later, include coded references to X-contingency, pre-fission material. The phrasing implies an awareness of nuclear principles before their official discovery. After the revolution, many pre-war scientific correspondences were absorbed into the reorganized State Institute for Geophysical Observation. Among its 1923 index cards is one labeled Tunguska Objekt, displaced magnetic axis. The attached field report, written in early Soviet orthography, summarizes residual radiation levels, without mechanical source. It also mentions recovery of metallic particles, lacking fusion crust, later described as non-terrestrial yet of engineered symmetry. No samples survive. Their inventory numbers were voided in 1932 during a general reclassification of foreign origin artifacts. The translated minutes of a closed meeting dated November 1923 indicate that the Commissariat's Scientific Division considered transferring all material to a facility near Sverdlovsk. One remark, attributed to Chief Engineer Taranov, stated that persistent energy emanations interfered with compasses and telegraph lines. Another, from an unnamed delegate, warned, "If it is not celestial, it is buried." From this point, documentation becomes fragmentary. Fragments of cable transmissions between Petrograd and Irkutsk, preserved in poor condition, suggest that by late 1923, a small research detachment under the code designation Sector 9 had been deployed to the site. Its purpose remains unclear. One decoded line reads, "Magnetic resonance sustained at constant amplitude. Subject requires isolation." According to later notes attributed to the translator archivist, identified only by initials, RD, Sector 9 surviving files were compiled in multiple languages, some using obsolete German shorthand. The translator's remarks point out recurring numeric patterns that align with geodesic calculations later associated with German aeronautical laboratories of the 1930s. These patterns, when plotted on coordinates corresponding to Tunguska, form a sequence consistent with latitude-longitude triangulations used in high-altitude navigation. Signal maintains coherence independent of source material. Cross-referencing with meteorological logs from the same period, the team observed a sequence of thermal irregularities centered precisely on the Tunguska latitude, recurring every 13.4 months. No natural model accounted for this interval. In the group's interim report to the Institute for Applied Geophysics, dated March 21, 1962, they proposed persistent subatmospheric oscillation, possibly induced by buried structure. The wording was later altered in the finalized copy to unidentified ground energy resonance, eliminating the term structure. By mid-1963, directives from Moscow required that all mention of the phenomenon be transferred from scientific to defense classification. The working group was renamed Unit 62B and reassigned to a facility near Omsk. The internal communications log preserved in the Novosibirsk archive includes a single surviving telegram from that period, reading stable. Harmonic persists. Awaiting central instruction. It bears the translator's annotation, repetition implies containment rather than explanation. During 1964, fragments of Western correspondence were intercepted by Soviet security services indicating foreign awareness of the same geographic coordinates. A decrypted American dispatch referenced irregular geomagnetic contour north of Yeniseisk, possibly residual of nuclear test. Soviet analysts appended the remark, no test conducted. Area sealed prior to 1940. A follow-up transmission from the same source mentioned persistent luminous discharge under ground ice, but the cable was truncated mid-sentence. The absence of completion was noted by RD with the comment, either suppression or interference. According to a later memorandum compiled by the same translator, several of the Tunguska files were requisitioned in 1938 by an unnamed bureau and shipped to Berlin. Their subsequent trace disappears in April 1945. Cross-referencing with German archives yields one probable match, a destroyed warehouse manifest listing, radioactive proban, Siberian 1908. The entry is followed by a blank space where inventory numbers should have been. When the Soviet government reopened scientific access to the region after the war, none of the pre-revolutionary data were acknowledged. All published studies referred to meteor impact or cometary explosion hypotheses. Nonetheless, marginal annotations in unpublished drafts indicate ongoing internal disagreement. One note, in English, was found on a Soviet report prepared for international exchange, local field persists. All readings falsified for foreign review. Later that year, the translator, RD, appended his own remark, evidence of deliberate suppression. Comparison with post-war German nuclear field notes confirms overlap of numeric systems. He underlined the phrase, numeric systems, adding, common origin implied. In subsequent years, as records multiplied and contradictions deepened, the inquiry shifted from open investigation to containment. The translator's later summaries, classified under restricted heading Directive T, suggest that the original Tunguska energy phenomenon was reinterpreted within internal documents as non-terrestrial radiological interference. However, the terminology was later replaced with the phrase localized atmospheric resonance event, presumably to obscure any implication of technology. By 1952, directives from Moscow ordered all related fieldwork suspended indefinitely. Surviving correspondence between the Central Committee and the Academy of Sciences uses bureaucratic phrasing such as, consolidate anomalous data under general meteor studies. One handwritten addendum, not part of the official record, notes, Sector 9 to remain unacknowledged. Archival evidence indicates that by this time, RD had obtained copies of early German experimental logs through covert channels. A single surviving translation draft includes diagrams resembling atomic lattice structures annotated with Cyrillic numerals. The translator's typed comment reads, configuration corresponds to magnetic model derived from Tunguska residuals. The line below is redacted. In early 1953, an internal memorandum within the Ministry of Medium Machine Building references Directive T as justification for securing facilities in the Urals. Though officially related to uranium processing, appended notes describe radiant emissions at non-fissionable levels. The translator concluded, in parentheses, identical spectral pattern to 1908 field recordings. By the mid-1950s, satellite reconnaissance began. The first aerial photographs of the Tunguska region revealed geomagnetic alignment inconsistent with terrain topography. Reports mention vector convergence toward non-visible center. The anomaly was dismissed publicly as film error. Within internal files, however, it was catalogued under Category Delta 3, Persistent Electromagnetic Zone. In subsequent documentation dated 1957, the same translator appears again, this time referenced in Western correspondence as Subject Art 12, Cultural Attaché, Geneva. Attached to his file is a confidential translation marked French, unverified source. The document contains fragments of an academic paper describing an energy field capable of atmospheric distortion consistent with early nuclear reaction signatures. The source of the French text remains unidentified. The translator's commentary appended in Russian states, language suggests original composed in German circa 1931. Possible continuation of S project. The meaning of S project remains unknown. According to subsequent internal cross memos, dissemination of any material labeled Tunguska was prohibited from 1959 onward. The event was officially reclassified under environmental phenomena, and personnel with prior access were reassigned. By 1961, all Tunguska documents were transferred to a secured facility near Novosibirsk under the Institute for Applied Geophysics. Their cataloging was supervised by the same translator, under new title Consultant, Foreign Documentation Section. His internal report, dated November 14, 1961, concludes, residual radiation decaying as expected. Underlying frequency constant. Cause unresolved. In February 1962, within the restricted archive compound near Novosibirsk, the file known as Directive T was reopened under Internal Authorization Code 11N/47. The stated purpose was re-evaluation of previously unverified radiological data recovered from the Tunguska region and cross-comparison with new atmospheric readings obtained from high-altitude detonations in Kazakhstan. The task was assigned to a small working group consisting of 6 technical specialists, none above the rank of engineer captain. Oversight remained with the consultant identified as RD in prior documentation. The group's first memorandum, classified Soversheno Sekretno, outlines several anomalies discovered while recalibrating magnetic flux instruments. Recorded intensities at coordinates previously listed as inert exceeded predicted values by factors of 4 to 6. The notation, residual alignment with axis field, unchanged since 1908, appears in the margin. An internal note, unsigned, specifies that the readings matched neither known radioactive decay patterns nor geomagnetic fluctuation. It concludes, "The Ministry of Medium Machine Building, responding to this intelligence, authorized limited reconnaissance using newly available radiometric aerial equipment. Flights executed between August and September 1965 detected faint emissions inconsistent with standard radioactive spectra. The accompanying technician's logbook, translated in 1972, described cyclic light pattern visible through cloud cover for approximately 2 minutes. The notation, source stationary, was underlined twice. Further investigation was hindered by concurrent military operations and deteriorating weather conditions. When the next expedition was approved in May 1967, it was led not by scientists but by security personnel operating under the cover of geological survey. Reports from that mission, later summarized by the translator, recorded no visible anomaly yet described instruments registering field inversion. The chief geologist's debriefing included a brief transcript of a radio exchange, transcribed verbatim. Field spike increasing. Origin. Below instrumentation threshold. The transcript ends with the remark, communication interrupted due to signal collapse. According to internal correspondence preserved in the Institute's sealed section, the event led to temporary recall of Unit 62B and closure of all regional research. A circular issued in early 1968 ordered destruction of duplicate data. Handwritten beneath the directive, in a different ink, appears the phrase, "RD retains originals for comparative translation." Throughout 1969, documentation concerning Tunguska was reclassified under code name Project MIR-12. The reorganization coincided with the establishment of orbital monitoring systems capable of detecting low-level gamma activity. Initial returns from these satellites, while unrelated to Tunguska operations, recorded anomalous flashes in the Siberian sector corresponding precisely to the old impact coordinates. Official explanations cited auroral interference. Nonetheless, internal memoranda from the Defense Ministry reference repeatable subatomic flux of fixed origin. RD's marginal annotations on these memoranda highlight numerical values identical to those logged in 1908 and 1923, amplitude 0.72, frequency variable 11.4. His typed comment, "Signal periodicity preserved despite atmospheric change," indicates artificial modulation. The line beneath, handwritten, "Device continues operation." In early 1970, a foreign report reached the Soviet embassy in Stockholm through unidentified channels. The document, written in German, contained incomplete diagrams labeled Magnetkern resins. Tunguska TYP analysis determined the typography consistent with pre-war laboratory prints from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. The attached translation, attributed to RD, included the following phrase, "Energy field sustained by reciprocal reflection of magnetic vectors in polarized matter." Soviet analysts classified the content as theoretical speculation, but RD added in pencil, "matches readings of Unit 62B, terminology prefigures post-war reactor design." The report includes a summary table cross-referencing field data with meteorological, seismic, and satellite information. Marginal notes indicate that several instruments malfunctioned near the epicenter while calibrated units positioned 10 kilometers distant remained stable. Internal memos from the Ministry of Defense, dated early 1997, indicate that proposals for a new, more intrusive investigation were deferred. Security concerns regarding unknown energy emissions are cited repeatedly. In one directive, the archivist notes, further deployment limited. Personnel rotation minimized to avoid exposure to unquantifiable energy signature. No additional personnel were assigned beyond the original observational team. In November 1997, a partial declassification review was conducted. The report acknowledges residual anomalies but labels them environmental curiosity. The attached translator's commentary explicitly states, official classification underestimates consistency of historical and contemporary measurements. Apparent suppression of data persists. Between 1998 and 1999, the final internal communications concerning Directive T and Observation Sector K3 reiterate that all anomalies are to be catalogued under general geophysical surveys. The last memoranda, dated February 1999, include summary charts and tables linking every recorded reading from 1908 to 1998. The translator's handwritten note appended to the margins reads, "Over 90 years, field demonstrates persistence, coherence, and artificial characteristics. Origin undetermined. Observation concluded, archival transfer recommended." The file concludes with an unsigned summary sheet. Directive T remains unresolved. All primary documentation transferred to central repository. No known cause established. Data correlation incomplete. Field exhibits persistence across multiple decades. Personnel previously assigned accounted for, except as noted. Outcome indeterminate. Parallel to these disappearances, renewed Western interest in Tunguska arose after 1983 following the publication of speculative studies on pre-nuclear detonation events. While public discourse remained unclassified, Soviet internal memoranda demonstrate concern that foreign attention may coincide with ongoing containment. The attached intelligence summary recommends maintenance of geographic obscurity. Satellite imagery from 1984 revealed changes in forest alignment at the historical epicenter, previously concentric, now shifted eastward by approximately 1.3 kilometers. A classified internal report concludes, magnetic field origin migrated or extended underground. The appended radiometric graph shows consistent amplitude identical to 1908 values. The translator's absence from this record is noted, yet the analytical phrasing matches earlier drafts known to have originated from his desk. Between 1985 and 1987, several military reconnaissance aircraft flying over central Siberia reported instrumentation deviation near Vanavara. Pilots' debriefings described temporary compass failures and loss of radio signal. 1 transcript records. Static increasing, source unidentified. Maintain course. Negative. Deviate eastward. The report ends with the line, anomaly dissipated after 27 seconds. The Air Force's subsequent technical assessment concluded no threat, attributing the occurrence to solar interference. Nonetheless, the same internal file contains a secondary notation from the Meteorological Service, solar activity negligible on recorded date. In 1988, during general archival restructuring, the Directive T materials were partially reviewed for declassification. A commission of 3 members, none of whom had prior access, compiled a summary concluding that no remaining data of national significance were present. However, appended to their report is a separate folder titled Unverified Translations, RD. There, from 1976 onward, RD continued producing translations of captured Western scientific materials. His typewritten memoranda, recovered from the archive decades later, often include cross-references to Directive T even when unrelated to the assigned topic. One surviving example concerns a U.S. report on subcrustal conductivity mapping. In its margin, RD wrote, "Identical resonant depth. Tunguska pattern confirmed." During 1977, seismic disturbances of minimal amplitude were recorded in the same region. The State Geophysical Service described them as ground pulses of indeterminate source. Instruments failed to identify origin depth. The report's statistical appendix, reviewed by RD, bears his final known annotation, 13-year recurrence cycle re-established. By 1978, all mentions of the phenomenon were officially prohibited. In May of that year, an interdepartmental directive ordered consolidation of legacy anomalous files under general archival cover. Among the reclassified materials was the entire Directive T dossier. The transfer register includes a brief final comment, translation section dissolved. All correspondence is terminated. No further mention of RD appears in institutional rosters after 1979. An internal audit conducted in 1981 lists certain missing items, for translation volumes, 3 magnetic data reels, and a sealed envelope labeled T 1908, Comparative Field Notes. The entry is accompanied by a handwritten remark, removed before inventory by authorized personnel. By 1971, due to increasing administrative scrutiny, RD's role was officially changed from consultant to archivist translator, effectively isolating him from ongoing fieldwork. Nevertheless, his later notes demonstrate continuing access to classified data. One entry, dated November 2, 1972, summarizes an internal experiment designated Operation Neva, which attempted to reproduce Tunguska-like energy emissions using controlled plasma discharge. The result was failure, but the observation, resonance achieved momentarily without detonation, was underlined. His closing remark, replication partial. Original source remains autonomous. Between 1973 and 1975, communication between institutes declined following administrative consolidation under the newly formed Ministry of Energy and Medium Engineering. Surviving circulars indicate progressive redaction of all Tunguska references. Documents were replaced with generic environmental categories. Nonetheless, intercepted Western publications continued referencing Siberian anomaly and magnetic scars. The ministry's internal counterintelligence review identified the leaks as speculative but authorized surveillance of scientific correspondence. One summary, unsigned, mentions an unnamed, foreign intermediary, allegedly in possession of early German laboratory records describing the Podkamenia field. The note adds that contact may have been established through former translation staff. This was followed by a confidential personnel review listing only one individual fitting that description, RD, who was subsequently relocated to an undisclosed post within the Central Documentation Bureau, Moscow. Within it were carbon copies of earlier documents bearing the translator's typewriter imprint. The pages, though faded, contain extensive comparative tables linking Tunguska field readings to experimental nuclear resonance spectra dated 1953 to 1954. At the end of the final page, the following line appears typed and underlined twice. Field constant beyond measurable decay. Hypothesis: controlled energy containment, non-fission mechanism, artificial origin. Below it, handwritten in faint graphite, one last annotation: this file will be sealed. Observation complete. The signature is partial, only the initials remain, RD. After 1989, with the restructuring of state institutions, the archive containing Directive T was relocated to the Unified Central Repository near Obninsk. Its current catalog reference lists the collection as incomplete, several items missing prior to transfer. Official inquiries into the whereabouts of the original translator were closed without result. The personnel index marks his status as untraceable since 1979. No additional investigations were recorded during the final decade of the century. Later memoranda reference the event only indirectly, through environmental studies or magnetic surveys, all concluding no abnormal readings observed. Yet one internal note, undated but estimated between 1990 and 1991, found among unrelated correspondence, reads in translation: interference resumed at pre-war coordinates. Signal unchanged. The file ends there. The remainder of the dossier consists of blank archival forms, unfilled identification slips, and an unsigned summary sheet stating only: Directive T remains unresolved. Data correlation incomplete. Cause undetermined. No further information was recovered. In the spring of 1992, internal communications between the Institute for Applied Geophysics and the Ministry of Defense reference renewed activity in the Tunguska sector. One memorandum, marked strict secretno, states, residual field continues. Conventional survey equipment reports anomalies consistent with historical readings. The note includes a single table listing coordinates, magnetic flux values, and comparative intensity from the years 1908, 1923, and 1965. The translator's annotation, preserved in pencil, remarks: flux pattern persistent over 84-year interval, artificial modulation cannot be excluded. A follow-up dispatch, dated July 1993, indicates a reconnaissance mission involving geophysical balloons and ground-penetrating magnetometers. The mission logs, translated and appended by RD, report the following: instruments detected a repetitive harmonic signal below detection threshold of conventional instrumentation at approximately 12 meters depth. Additional remarks note slight variations in the amplitude during diurnal cycles. All readings were recorded but transmitted only to central archives. A brief summary was sent to the Ministry of Energy, citing environmental research purposes. During late 1993, the State Archive retrieved pre-World War II German research logs that had been declassified inadvertently. These logs, when compared with Soviet-era readings, indicated striking similarity in numeric sequences. The translator's notation highlights recurring triplets corresponding to oscillation frequency, amplitude, and phase, parameters unaccounted for in contemporary scientific literature. One marginal comment states, patterns suggest pre-atomic experimental framework, correspondence between sites deliberate, unexplained. In March 1994, an internal review of geophysical survey procedures mentions anomalies affecting satellite calibration. The report, translated from original Russian, reads, "Magnetic interference within coordinates 60°55 and 101°57 obstructs standard geolocation systems. Signal exhibits persistence despite seasonal variation." Footnotes appended by the archivist indicate previous observations from 1952, 1962, and 1977, linking them to similar atmospheric phenomena. Further documentation recovered from the Ministry of Energy in May 1995 describes the creation of a restricted subunit tasked with long-term monitoring of the Tunguska field. The unit, designated Observation Sector K3, was equipped with early digital instrumentation, yet readings repeatedly exceeded the operational parameters. The attached internal note, partially redacted, specifies field coherence independent of any known natural mechanism. No fission reaction detected. Energy levels steady over extended periods. In September 1995, cross-referenced intelligence files indicate that foreign agencies were aware of monitoring efforts. One intercepted cable from an unnamed Western source references persistent radiological anomaly north of Vanavara and suggests comparison with pre-war experimental data from German laboratories. Translation notes appended by RD point out that the numeric correlation matches readings recorded in Soviet archives in 1965 and 1972. The archivist remarks, data suggests controlled energy environment, not stochastic occurrence. By 1996, the field site exhibited further anomalies. A report prepared by Sector K3 documents minor geomagnetic shifts, unaccompanied by surface activity. Measurements over 6 consecutive months showed oscillation consistency at a period of 13.4 months, corroborating historical patterns first noted in 1908. No further entries appear beyond this point. The archivist RD is listed as having overseen the final compilation, yet his whereabouts after 1979 remain unrecorded. Several supporting documents, including magnetic tape records, translation drafts, and early field logs, are noted as missing. The file remains partially sealed in the Central Archive near Obninsk, with restricted access maintained into the late 20th century. The evidence collected across nearly a century suggests a phenomenon of persistent energy or radiological origin, exhibiting artificial modulation patterns inconsistent with natural or known technological processes of any observed period. All investigative and archival attempts failed to identify a definitive source. The sequence of field measurements, correspondence, and translations demonstrate systematic observation by multiple generations of scientific and military personnel, yet the ultimate cause remains unresolved. In April 1999, internal communication within the Central Archive indicates that preliminary digitization of Directive T materials had commenced. The digitization log, marked strict secretno, notes that several magnetic tape reels corresponding to field recordings from 1962, 1965, and 1977 were partially degraded. One entry reads, "Signal continuity observed in remaining segments. Data truncated, numerical pattern intact." The archivist's annotation, in pencil and partially illegible, states, "Comparison confirms field persistence over entire observational period. Pattern exhibits coherence beyond environmental expectation." A supplementary memo, circulated among the Oversight Committee, documents that remote sensing equipment deployed near Vanavara in January 1999 registered minor geomagnetic anomalies consistent with historical readings. The report includes coordinates, amplitude charts, and notes on instrument calibration. Marginal commentary indicates that readings fluctuated minimally in response to natural phenomena, reinforcing the assessment that the underlying source is of non-natural origin. The same archive contains a fragmentary file titled Sector K, 3 Daily Logs, 1998 to 1999, including summaries of ground-penetrating magnetometer surveys. Observers recorded cyclical fluctuations, with amplitude ranges correlating to measurements from decades prior. Observers were instructed to maintain minimal disturbance. One translated log entry, dated August 14, 1998, states, resonant frequency observed at 0.72 cycles/min. No associated seismic or thermal anomaly detected. A subsequent note, appended in the translator's hand, emphasizes, persistence over 90 years confirms artificial modulation, origin remains indeterminate. Internal correspondence between the Ministry of Defense and the Institute for Applied Geophysics, preserved in draft form, highlights continuing concern over foreign awareness of the anomaly. Decrypted intercepts from a Western communications channel, dated May 1998, reference Siberian residual energy field, anomalous, persistent, unexplained. The memo notes that reconnaissance attempts by foreign satellite and aerial surveillance repeatedly failed to account for the origin of the readings. The translator's annotation comments, patterns match Soviet historical data, continuity across decades suggests controlled environment rather than stochastic natural event. The final operational log from Observation Sector K3, dated January 1999, records repeated measurements using multiple instrument arrays. Field data included amplitude, frequency, phase, and vector orientation. Despite several days of continuous monitoring, no variation outside previously established ranges was detected. The summary concludes, signal coherence persists independent of environmental or human activity. No physical object identified. A footnote in RD's translation adds, pattern demonstrates precise modulation consistent with previous Sector 62B data. Cause remains unexplained. Cross-referencing the complete dataset from 1908 through 1999, the archivist noted consistent intervals, amplitude regularity, and directional stability. In addition, archival annotations indicate that every attempt at replication through controlled laboratory or field experiments failed to produce matching results. One internal comment, undated but estimated from 1996 to 1998, reads, artificial modulation present in field data, unknown source. Remains consistent across temporal and technological variations. By the end of 1999, the consolidated Directive T dossier includes field measurements, translated foreign communications, historical memos, reconnaissance logs, laboratory attempts at replication, and all translator annotations. The final summary, prepared for the Central Repository, reads, Directive T documents persistent anomalous energy observed at Podkamenia Tunguska coordinates. Measurements from 1908 through 1999 confirm amplitude, frequency, and directional coherence beyond natural explanation. Numerous investigative attempts, both historical and contemporary, failed to identify causative mechanism. Evidence of artificial modulation present, origin undetermined. Remaining materials partially lost or degraded. Archivist notes, correlation with pre-war experimental patterns suggests continuity across temporal and geopolitical boundaries. File sealed, no further dissemination authorized. The memorandum states, all personnel reassigned, site secured. Historical data preserved. No additional instrumentation deployment authorized at this time. Translation notes appended by RD include a numeric comparison table spanning 91 years of recorded data, with an underlined notation, amplitude and frequency stability exceed expected decay models. Artificial origin cannot be excluded. During the same period, minor geomagnetic fluctuations were observed in regions peripheral to the Tunguska epicenter. A technical report details, subtle oscillations detected at peripheral sites, magnitude lower than central field but correlates with vector orientation observed in primary anomaly zone. Translator commentary notes, peripheral modulation consistent with primary field coherence. Suggests influence extends beyond initial epicenter without detectable energy source. In May 1999, additional review of historical German laboratory notes, captured prior to World War II and previously classified, was conducted. One set of diagrams, labeled Magnetkern Resins Experiment 1936, was cross-referenced with Soviet field logs. RD's annotations observe, experimental energy patterns correspond numerically with 1962 and 1972 readings. Suggests early awareness of persistent field modulation. A subsequent memo, directed to the Ministry of Defense, recommends archival preservation and restricted access, noting, partial understanding, cause unconfirmed. Potential strategic significance. Observation Sector K3's final summary, dated June 1999, consolidates data from all previous surveys, remote sensing missions, and field observations. Key points include: recurrent harmonic modulation over 91 years. Persistent amplitude and vector alignment across multiple measurement platforms. Correlation with historical foreign experimental records. No natural, mechanical, or human origin confirmed. Artificial modulation suspected but unverified. Observation concluded. File remains sealed, outcome indeterminate. Persistent monitoring recommended for future scientific verification. Directive T thus represents a complete historical dossier, documenting the Tunguska anomaly from 1908 through 1999, fully integrating field data, translated foreign communications, laboratory attempts at replication, and archival commentary. The phenomenon remains one of the most thoroughly observed and systematically recorded unexplained energy events of the 20th century, its origin, mechanism, and purpose unresolved, leaving the record open-ended and incomplete. In February 1999, the Central Archive initiated final cataloging of Directive T materials in preparation for long-term preservation. The cataloging log indicates the following components were present. Original field logs from 1908, 1923, 1962, 1965, 1977, and 1995 to 1998. Translations of foreign intelligence intercepts spanning 1938 to 1998. Laboratory attempt reports from Operation Neva, 1972, and other Soviet-controlled experiments. Observation Sector K3 daily logs and final summaries, 1995 to 1999. Translator RD's marginal annotations and handwritten comments. During cross-referencing, archivists noted consistent cyclicity in field measurements, a 13.4-month recurrence, persistent amplitude across decades, and vector alignment corresponding to both early German experimental records and Soviet-era measurements. An undated internal summary sheet, annotated in RD's hand, notes, consistency confirms autonomous or artificially modulated field. External replication attempts fail. Cause remains unidentifiable. In March 1999, internal communications between the Institute for Applied Geophysics and the Ministry of Defense confirmed that observation sector K3 had ceased active monitoring. Oscillatory patterns replicate the frequency and amplitude recorded in 1908, 1923, 1962, 1965, 1977, and 1995 to 1996. Translation notes emphasize that observed signal exhibits coherence incompatible with natural stochastic processes or known human-engineered devices of the period. Observation Sector K3, in collaboration with the Ministry of Energy, prepared a final longitudinal study in November 1998. The study synthesized all surviving measurements from the early 20th century through 1998, including magnetic flux readings, subsurface radar reflections, gamma-ray spectra, low-frequency electromagnetic oscillation measurements, historical foreign intelligence intercepts. The compiled report concludes that all data demonstrate persistent, coherent, and modulated energy signals. RD's annotations include repeated references to the consistency of the 13.4-month cyclicity and alignment of subsurface anomalies with previous German laboratory notes, specifically those documenting experimental nuclear modulation techniques predating the Manhattan Project. A hand-drawn diagram in the margin correlates measurement sites across decades, illustrating a recurring vector pattern suggestive of controlled orientation. In January 1999, the final observational report of Observation Sector K3, prepared for Central Archival Transfer, lists 37 separate anomalies recorded between 1908 and 1998. Recurrent harmonic modulation at subsurface depths. Persistent amplitude stability despite environmental variability. Indications of artificial modulation independent of known physical mechanisms. The final directive included a summary sheet. Directive T concludes primary observational phase. No causative source identified. Field exhibits persistent, coherent, and artificially modulated characteristics over a 91-year period. The last entry in the archive, in the hand of RD, consists of a single line written in pencil beneath the typed summary, observation complete. Cause unresolved. Field continues. No subsequent documents or reports were filed. The file was transferred to permanent storage with restricted access, and all electronic copies were secured under multiple layers of classification. No personnel records exist to indicate the fate of RD after this period. Similarly, no subsequent scientific or military missions are recorded in the archives that would have revisited the Tunguska anomaly. The collection remains a chronologically continuous account of persistent anomalous energy, systematically observed over 91 years, yet lacking any conclusive explanation. The entirety of the dossier suggests a phenomenon that transcends conventional understanding of geophysical, meteorological, or radiological processes. Measurements demonstrate stability, coherence, and periodicity inconsistent with stochastic natural events. Attempts to recreate, manipulate, or intercept the field across multiple decades consistently failed, implying a controlled or self-sustaining source. The historical record is supplemented by ancillary material from foreign intelligence and early German laboratory notes, suggesting that knowledge of the phenomenon may have existed prior to its first documented observation. Yet no direct causal link is confirmed. The recurring annotations and translated fragments underscore that the phenomenon persisted irrespective of human intervention or environmental change. No definitive conclusion is present in any surviving document. The compiled dossier illustrates a case of persistent unexplained energy with signatures suggesting artificial modulation and long-term stability. The data remain uncorrelated with known scientific principles of the 20th century. All investigative threads, field observation, archival translation, laboratory replication, and foreign intelligence review, converge on the same unresolved outcome. The final archival reflection, appended by R.D., reads, "Across 91 years, the anomaly demonstrates consistent characteristics. No human, natural, or mechanical origin can be confirmed. Observation continues to suggest artificial modulation of unknown provenance. File remains partially sealed, outcome indeterminate. Persistent monitoring advised, though cause remains inaccessible to available scientific methodology." Directive T, encompassing all surviving documents from 1908 to 1999, thus concludes in a state of sustained ambiguity, representing a continuous observational record without resolution. The phenomenon's existence is indisputable, its origin, mechanism, and purpose remain unverified. The meticulous documentation, translations, and archival cross-references illustrate both the systematic nature of the investigation and the enduring inability of contemporary science or intelligence to account for the observed effects. In March 1995, prior to the initiation of Observation Sector K3, an internal note prepared by the Institute for Applied Geophysics referenced prior anomalies in the Podkamenia Tunguska region, noting specifically, residual electromagnetic interference detectable with field strength meters. The memo includes a table listing historical readings from 1908, 1923, 1962, and 1977. Footnotes indicate that early instrumentation was incapable of recording frequency modulation beyond the second decimal place. Marginal annotations, attributed to R.D., clarify, comparison suggests controlled field activity, coherence retained beyond expected environmental decay. During 1996, the Ministry of Defense authorized the installation of mobile ground-penetrating radar units within a 10-kilometer radius of the historic epicenter. Technical reports, appended to the main Directive T file, document consistent anomalies at variable depths, ranging from 3 to 15 meters. Notably, the radar reflections lacked geometric regularity but exhibited repeating amplitude cycles correlating with previous magnetic flux readings. One internal note, translated and annotated by R.D., remarks, "Observed reflections repeat at intervals of 13.4 months, mirroring historical cyclicity, replication unsuccessful under controlled conditions." In May 1996, preliminary aerial reconnaissance using modified reconnaissance aircraft detected minor disruptions in compass orientation and intermittent radio signal loss. The flight log, partially recovered in 2002, includes the following fragment. At 12:15 local time, magnetic deviation observed over coordinates 60°55 and 101°57 Orientation error 3.2 degrees. Radio silence for approximately 24 seconds. Signal restored without intervention. RD's translated annotation, pattern conforms to persistent field signature, cause undetermined. By early 1997, geophysical instrumentation had been enhanced to include gamma-ray spectrometry, low-frequency electromagnetic oscillation detection, and subsurface thermal imaging. Reports from January through March detail repeated anomalies in all three domains, with data cross-referenced against historical records. Internal assessment notes described the field as coherently persistent, temporally stable, and artificially modulated, while translation footnotes emphasize that readings cannot be accounted for by conventional geophysical processes or any known atmospheric phenomena. In June 1997, Internal Communications described the first incident of partial instrument failure directly attributable to field interference. One technician log, translated into Russian by RD, states, gamma spectrometer reset spontaneously, amplitude readings anomalously high, device resumes normal function after 17 seconds. No external cause identified. A corresponding note appended in pencil, event mirrors historical Sector 62B anomalies, 1965 to 1967. Field exerts measurable effect on electronic instrumentation. Observation Sector K3 recorded similar electronic disturbances in December 1997 and January 1998. Each event lasted between 15 and 25 seconds, during which standard logging equipment failed to record data. Post-event analysis indicates a stable return to baseline immediately after disruption. The translator's marginal commentary notes, electronic suppression consistent with historical data. Suggests self-sustaining energy field. In March 1998, cross-referenced intelligence reports confirm foreign awareness of anomalies at Tunguska. One decrypted Western message, originally transmitted by an unnamed reconnaissance unit, states, persistent magnetic and radiological signature at North Siberia coordinates. Undetermined source. Anomalies exhibit modulation resembling historical nuclear tests, without any associated detonation. RD's translated note appended to the file, comparison with Soviet Sector 62B data demonstrates numerical identity with field measurements from 1962 and 1972. Independent confirmation of anomaly persistence. During August 1998, a small unmanned ground survey using automated magnetic and radiological sensors was conducted within 2 kilometers of the epicenter. Survey logs, preserved in Directive T, detail repeated anomalies occurring at subsurface depths ranging from 4 to 12 meters. Data incomplete due to archival losses and instrument degradation. Further investigation advised if technological capability permits. The last page of the dossier contains a marginal note, handwritten by RD, observation complete. Cause unresolved. Persistence indicates autonomous or controlled origin. File sealed. Monitoring recommended if future instrumentation permits. Directive T, encompassing 91 years of continuous observation, remains a systematically documented case of anomalous energy with artificial modulation characteristics. All archival evidence, including early field logs, translated foreign communications, laboratory notes, and repeated observations by multiple generations of scientific and military personnel, demonstrates a coherent, persistent phenomenon beyond the explanatory power of contemporary geophysical or radiological knowledge. No definitive conclusion is present in any surviving document. The dossier illustrates a temporally continuous energy anomaly at the Podkamenia Tunguska site. Recurrent and predictable modulation patterns. Unexplained subsurface and atmospheric effects affecting electronic instrumentation. Correlation with pre-World War II German laboratory data suggesting awareness of similar experimental energy signatures. The file concludes in a state of sustained ambiguity. Despite meticulous archival reconstruction, translation, and analysis, the phenomenon remains unexplained. All investigative threads, field observation, laboratory testing, translation of foreign sources, and archival consolidation, converge on a single unresolved outcome: persistent, coherent energy of undetermined origin, observed over nearly a century, systematically documented but never fully understood. The final archival reflection appended by R.D., preserved in pencil beneath the typed summary, reads, "Across 91 years, the anomaly exhibits consistent and coherent characteristics. Repeated failure to replicate or disrupt the field in controlled experiments." An annexed translation note states, "Artificial modulation remains unverified but strongly suggested. All investigative avenues explored within current technological capability." Marginal pencil annotation by R.D., field autonomous. Observation complete. Cause unresolved. Continued monitoring recommended if instrumentation allows future analysis. In July 1999, a final internal memorandum outlines the closure of Directive T archival operations. It specifies the transfer of all materials to the central repository near Obninsk, noting that partial losses occurred due to degradation of magnetic tapes and field logs. Surviving materials include full translations, observational summaries, and translator annotations. File sealed under strict access control. The accompanying catalog entry reiterates that the phenomenon observed at Podkamenia Tunguska coordinates from 1908 through 1999 remains unresolved. The dossier systematically demonstrates persistence of an anomalous energy field over nearly a century. Recurrent and coherent modulation patterns independent of environmental or anthropogenic interference. Influence on both electronic instrumentation and magnetic field readings. Correlation with experimental records from pre-World War II laboratories. No evidence within the archive identifies a natural, mechanical, or human origin. Attempts at replication in laboratory and field conditions repeatedly failed. The phenomenon's behavior, cyclicity, and vector stability strongly suggest autonomous or controlled modulation, yet the mechanism remains unobservable and undefined within 20th-century scientific parameters. The final page of Directive T bears only a single note in pencil, in R.D.'s handwriting. Directive T complete. Observation concluded. Cause unresolved. Data integrity maintained. Phenomenon persists beyond current understanding. File sealed, outcome indeterminate. No further records exist beyond this point. Personnel records confirm that R.D. remained in central archival duties until at least 1979, after which his location is unrecorded. Observation personnel from Sector K, 3 were reassigned in 1999. Supporting instrumentation, including gamma spectrometers, magnetometers, and subsurface radar arrays, were either decommissioned or transferred for permanent storage. Directive T, in totality, constitutes a 91-year chronicle of sustained, coherent anomalous energy at the Podkamenia Tunguska site. Observational methods, translations of foreign communications, archival cross-references, and laboratory tests collectively document a phenomenon consistently demonstrating artificial modulation characteristics over multiple decades. Yet despite exhaustive investigation, the origin, mechanism, and purpose remain unverified. The dossier's surviving records, field logs, translated foreign communications, laboratory attempts, and translator annotations, converge to illustrate a singular unresolved outcome, a persistent, coherent energy phenomenon, systematically documented but never fully understood. The historical evidence, preserved in Directive T, suggests a continuum of observation, measurement, and archival diligence by multiple generations of scientific and military personnel, yet concludes with no causal identification. All investigative and archival efforts, while thorough and methodical, culminate in a singularly ambiguous resolution: persistence without explanation, modulation without origin, and observation without comprehension. The last archival reflection, attributed to R.D., encapsulates the cumulative findings. Across 91 years, the anomaly exhibits persistent and coherent characteristics. Cause undetermined. Artificial modulation suspected, unverified. Observation concluded. File sealed. Outcome indeterminate. Continued monitoring recommended if instrumentation permits future analysis. Directive T, encompassing the period 1908 to 1999, thus represents one of the most thoroughly documented yet unresolved anomalous phenomena of the 20th century. Its existence is verified through methodical observation, translation, and archival cross-reference. Its nature, origin, and mechanism remain entirely unexplained. No further documentation, personnel records, or investigative reports concerning the Tunguska anomaly have been recovered. The file remains sealed in the central repository near Obninsk, representing a continuous historical record of unexplained, persistent energy whose definitive explanation remains inaccessible to contemporary science.